On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we are giving portal updates, discussing names like Jalen Kimber, Nic Scourton, and Peny Boone. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day throughout 2023. This is the final episode of the calendar year. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, 5 days a week, your team every day. Well, it felt like the first wave of portal commitments was out of the way, and Jalen Kimber said, hold on just a second. The Florida defensive back became the most recent portal commitment for Jeff Brom's program. We'll talk about what that means for the cornerbacks room. We'll also talk about the Cardinals getting a visit coming up next week from star edge rusher Nic Scourton. And we'll also talk about Toledo running back, including Louisville in his final three. Peny Boone will now focus on UK, UofL, and Florida State. So a lot of good recruiting talk on today's episode of the show. We're going to start with the most recent commitment. Jalen Kimber from the Florida Gators. The cornerback played 4 seasons with the Gators program. This season being his statistically best, 23 total tackles, 1 fumble recovery. He had 1 interception in his career with the Gators. I would assume that he probably has 2 years of eligibility remaining. The 6-foot native of Mansfield, Texas, started the majority of the season for the Gators. Now, I will say, for full disclosure, there really doesn't seem to be a lot of glaring reviews surrounding Kimber's play with the Gators. Sometimes that is the bitterness of a fan base. Other times it's just, it's the truth. And sometimes it's just a little bit of both. Now, granted, I want to introduce some thoughts from Locked On Gators host Brandon Olson. Brandon is one of the best hosts that the Locked On Podcast Network has to offer. He's going to shoot it to you straight. He's not going to sugarcoat it, but he's also not going to be truly over-the-top biased about it. He has a very, very just level-headed way of thinking about things, and bias really isn't included in a lot of his overall takes. He had this to say. I asked him, I said, Brandon, tell me about Jalen Kimber. What are your thoughts on his career at Florida? And verbatim, this is what Brandon told me. I quote, he's a decent cornerback, capable of playing multiple coverages. He's not a physical corner at all, very bad at making a play on the ball, but whether man or zone, he's usually pretty tight on his assignment. Played much of the 2022 season with a cast on his right hand, and it really didn't change his play much. Also a great kid. So I think that now, granted, what Brandon Olson thinks, this is no disrespect to my guy Brandon because he's a friend of mine. Just because he says this doesn't make it gospel, right? Just because a certain fan base says something about a former player doesn't make it true, doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, because we've seen all throughout the college football transfer landscape a player, insert player here, struggles at place A, but when he transfers to place B, he plays better. He, finds more confidence. He's in a better scheme for him. He improves more. I remember Florida State fans talking really, really badly about Jarvis Brownlee, and Jarvis Brownlee ended up being one of the best cornerbacks on the team for the Cardinals, and, he outplayed the expectations. So I think that you have to take everything with a grain of salt. I think you have to be honest with yourself that not every addition that you're going to make, that player is going to turn into a star, but you also can't sit here and listen to what the opposing fan base says dictate how you feel about a certain transfer. The bottom line is that you have to truly trust the coaching staff, and I hope in this case that the Cardinals going after Kimber means that there's confidence from Steve Ellis Ron English, Mark Hagan, Mark Ivy, that he's going to be able to play a certain role within this Cardinals defense. Now, I have seen that a lot of people feel as if Kimber isn't the greatest tackler. He's not terrible in coverage, although he got picked on a couple times in that Kentucky game. Really didn't have all that great of a performance against the Wildcats back in September. But ultimately, I think that it depends on what his role is going to be with the Cardinals. I think ultimately he's going to be a rotational guy. A couple years with the Cardinals or a couple years of college eligibility remaining. I think he's going to be able to apply for another year in 2025 if he wants to use it. But, excuse me. I think that right now you look at the cornerback landscape for the Cardinals. You have Corey Thornton, who I think is going to be a starter. The transfer from Central Florida, I think he's going to be one of the starters. If Tay Holloway is going to be that guy, that is yet to be determined. I think that he definitely has a chance. The transfer from North Carolina, who had some up and down moments as a redshirt freshman. And then you also enter the mix Jalen Kimber. Don't forget that this is a room that doesn't have a lot of numbers. You lose Jarvis Brownlee. You lost Derek Edwards. You lost Marquise Groves-Killebrew. There's a pretty decent chance you're going to lose Quincy Riley to the NFL draft. That's 4 guys right away. And you're going to have numbers, and not every player you can bring in can start. So personally, I think that Kimber is going to be there's a chance he might be able to play himself into a starting role, but I think he's probably going to be a rotational piece for Ron English's defense. I think in coverage situations, third down, third and long is when you're going to see Kimber play most of his snaps. Granted, it's hard to tell at this point how the coaching staff views his role. Granted, at the same token, there's something that they obviously like when they view his game because they took his commitment at this point with not as many scholarships available. It's up in the air. So we'll see. Obviously, I think the ACC is a little bit it's not the SEC, so maybe he finds a little bit more success playing in the ACC. He does have Power 5 experience. If he's starting next year for Louisville, I do wonder what the cornerback room is going to look like in terms of production. It's hard to see the cornerback room as an upgrade to this year's cornerback room. I think that they still add probably 2 guys at the position moving forward. So I look at this as a depth piece for the Cardinals. It would be solid depth. I am not sold on Kimber being a starter for this team, although he was a starter for Florida. Now you could say, well, if he can start for Florida, could he not start for Louisville? Yes, it seemed like this was sort of a mutual decision, him entering the portal. It looked like Florida was going to go with some younger guys next season. So, you can make the case of, oh, he was a starter. Well, yeah, but was he going to be the starter in 2024 if he stayed? You see what I'm saying? So if he's a starter, I can definitely obviously give that a chance. But I think if he's in a rotational spot for the Cardinals, I'll probably feel a little bit better with obviously the ceiling being a starting level guy for this defense. So truthfully, we're sort of in wait and see approach because there's going to be multiple moving parts in this equation. There's multiple guys entering the mix. Also, something that you can't discount is the guys that are on the roster right now. Marcus Washington, the transfer from Georgia, former 4-star guy, will be a redshirt freshman. Or I'm sorry, I think redshirt sophomore now. Is he going to play a matter in the mix? There's been glaring reviews about former 4-star recruit Aaron Williams, a part of that Flyville 23, Bosco to the Ville movement. Is he going to play a role? Obviously was injured this past year. You think that maybe this means that he's going to play a little bit larger of a role in 2024. And I think fully healthy that he is a very good player. So we're talking starters, non-starters right now when really we should just be talking about the room in general. And I think that adding Kimber to the room makes your room better. Now, how much better, I don't know, depending on the role, right? But I'm interested to see what the staff views in terms of the role that he's going to play. And don't take this as me saying that Kimber's not good enough to play at Louisville or that I don't agree with them taking the commitment here, because I think that he can definitely offer some good stuff for the Cardinals. I just wonder about what his what his role is going to be. I wonder how he's going to improve from his struggles in 2023 and moving forward. So that's the main thing for me. But Portal recruiting news is not slowing down for the Cardinals. They will be hosting a top 10 player from the portal on January 4th. On the next segment of the show, we'll talk about the Cardinals getting involved with Purdue transfer Nic Scourton. We'll do that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first to listen throughout 2023. Just a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national sports covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Some very exciting news materialized over the past couple of days when Nic Scourton from Purdue entered the portal, led the Big Ten in sacks in 2023, has 2 years of eligibility remaining, was recruited by the former coaching staff at Purdue, which so happens to be Jeff Brom and company. When he entered the portal, Louisville's name was sort of thrown out there as a spot that would make sense for him. They brought Ashton Gelati back, but there still is another spot on the other side of the line. And the 6'4", 280-pound native of Bryan, Texas, had a fantastic season, ranked as a top 10 portal player in the transfer portal, top 10 player in the transfer portal. It would make sense for Louisville. I tweeted out, imagine him in a pass rush with Gelati and Mason Reiger. And obviously a lot of Louisville fans were going with that on social media because it makes a ton of sense. It felt like, okay, yeah, Louisville was going to kick the tires on this possibility, but was it really going to be truly, likely that he shows interest in the Cardinals? Well, that answer turned out to be yes. At this moment, he has a visit scheduled for January 4th with the program. There's a dead period in place at the moment, which allows, or it doesn't allow for players to visit until January 3rd. He does have a visit on the 3rd that is with Florida State. It doesn't help when you are the first or when you're not the first visit, but it does offer you a little bit of comfort that the Cardinals visit is legitimately the next day. So if he is going to be swayed by the Florida State coaching staff, then obviously it must be one hell of a pitch. So the fact that he's visiting on the 4th is big news for the team, because usually when a player visits Louisville in the portal, there is a very good chance that the Cardinals end up with the commitment. Now, they haven't really been in the mix for players of this caliber a lot over the past 2 years. They were with Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey, but Scourton is a real deal type player in the portal. He's a top 10 player. He's one of your ceiling raising type of guys. And if Louisville wants to get to that next level as a program to where they are viewed at more respectfully by national media in terms of perception, Nic Scourton, formerly Nick Carraway, is the type of player, the type of caliber player that you have to go get if you want to take that next step. So I know that there's a lot of fear that Texas A&M could be in the mix, and I would believe it. Bryan, Texas is a stone's throw away from College Station, and Texas A&M has been losing a lot of players. So this will make a ton of sense. You also have Georgia. Not hard to see why Georgia would be an easy sell to a defensive player. You have NFL draft aspirations and the aspirations to go win a national title. Georgia is a very easy sell. But obviously, Florida State is a place that is highly respected. And you lose a lot of that defensive line led by Jared Verse. So there is opportunity right away. The hope here is that he doesn't cancel the visit to the Cardinals program. Obviously, you're holding your breath so you get to January 4th. And when you do get to the 4th, you hope that you can seal the deal to where he doesn't take another visit after that. The fact that the Cardinals are in the mix here, very good news. But if you want to get to the next level, you have to find a way to seal the deal here for the Cardinals. And what the potential impact is, it really doesn't take much to convince people that this is a ceiling raising move. You bring in a guy like Nic Scourton to this defensive line, and you have one of the most talented defensive line units in Louisville program history. That is not an exaggeration. Don't think it is. I know that there's been very talented defensive lines in the past however many years of this program's history. Ashton Gelati, Nic Scourton might be the best pass rushing duo that Louisville maybe has ever had. Now, I don't want to put the cart before the horse there because you have had guys like Yasir Abdullah and Ashton Gelati and Yaya Diaby. Nic Scourton's a guy that's doing this in the Big Ten. Just led the Big Ten in sacks. He is a potential All-American next season. 50 total tackles, 10 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 3 pass deflections, 6'4", 280 pounds. It just makes way too much sense for Louisville. You add more pass rush. That was sort of an issue this season. It's like, man, the pass rush just isn't really getting home for the Cardinals. With Gelati and Scourton, that's a very, very talented pass rushing duo. And you can also make the pitch to Nick that, hey, look, you're going to come to our program, but you're not going to have to face double teams all the time because you have Ashton Gelati, who first team All-American, right on the other side. And you have Thor Griffith on the interior. You have Des Tell. You have Jordan Girard. You have multiple guys in the middle. You might have Jermaine Lole that takes a little bit of pressure off of you to where you can work one-on-one and have a solid opportunity to win more games and play a ton, have the opportunity to, just essentially make this a money year for you. And it would just make a lot of sense. I think that this is a possible move that can be viewed as a ceiling raiser. There have been a couple of them this offseason. Monroe Mills, number 1 tackle out of the portal, left tackle for Texas Tech. He is a ceiling raiser. Having a left tackle that's extremely solid, directly associated with solid success for an offense, regardless of where you're at. Colin Lacey, Ja'Cory Brooks, 2 difference makers at the wide receiving position. Guess what? Ceiling raisers. Makes a ton of sense, right? You get better. You have one of the best wide receiving corps in the ACC now. Just doesn't, obviously, it doesn't take a lot of common sense to understand that those 2 guys are ceiling raiser. And guess what? Nic Scourton, the same exact situation. And he potentially would be the best pound-for-pound player that you've gotten out of the portal. There are a lot of programs that want his services. Statistically, he was the best pass rusher in a conference that has very good offensive line play. I'm looking at some of his games this season. You look at what he's done: 2 sacks against Indiana, a sack and a forced fumble against Ohio State that has good offensive linemen. All over the place. Iowa, Michigan had 2 sacks against Michigan. Michigan's a very, very good offensive line-led team. Same thing with Minnesota, 1 sack against Minnesota. I think that the statistics speak for themselves, not to mention that he has multiple years of eligibility. I'm not sure that he's going to need to use them if he has a year 3 that is indicative of his talents. You're talking about, I don't really want to throw a first-round level draft grade out there right away, but I think that at the very least, potentially day 2 for a guy like Nic Scourton, if he can replicate any of the production that he had at Purdue. 6'4", 280 pounds, solid size, would probably project as the Leo in the Cardinals defense. Extremely versatile, extremely explosive off the line, solid size, solid swim technique, and I like the footwork there as well. So I would really like to see him in Cardinal red because there's no telling what this guy could do alongside Ashton Gelati, Mason Reiger, etc. So definitely one to keep an eye out on. Another one to keep an eye out on is Peny Boone, the Toledo running back that had over 1,000 yards rushing this past year for the Rockets, is in the portal, has included Louisville in his top 3, and why it might be a bluegrass battle for the Rockets star. We'll talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's literally just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. What that essentially means is that you can go with LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of three-pointers made and receptions. If you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now do so by finding community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Using the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. As I mentioned a little earlier in the show, this is the final episode of the 2023 calendar year. Extremely grateful for all of you all that tune in daily, weekly, however much you all tune in once, even if it's once in 2023. I definitely appreciate you all. Those that have subscribed on the streaming services, those that show love on social media, the comments of the YouTube section, whatever may have you. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and I look forward to a very prosperous 2024 for the podcast and, more importantly, for Louisville athletics. But final segment of the 2024 calendar year, or 2023 calendar year, we'll be discussing Toledo running back Peny Boone. Peny Boone is nicknamed Baby Bus, and if you saw that he was 6'1", 242 pounds, you would understand that reference. Connected to former Steelers Hall of Fame running back Jerome Bettis. He's a native of Detroit, Michigan, transferred from Maryland after spending 2 years with the Terrapins program. Really couldn't find his footing in the depth chart. 2022 had a breakout season. In 2023, all hell broke loose for him. 194 rushing yards, 194 carries, 1,400 rushing yards, 15 total touchdowns for him. Also had a career high in receptions with 15, 219 receiving yards, and his first receiving touchdown. Averaged a whopping 7.2 yards per carry. That is fantastic. Now, you do have to wonder, okay, how much of this is playing against bad competition in the MAC? You know, he played in Illinois defense, only had 9 for 29, played against Miami, Ohio, 11 for 41, Texas Southern, 6 for 39, but he also had 3 touchdowns in that game. He obviously is now being discussed in the same light of other non-Power 5 transfers as to whether or not that skill set can transfer over to the Power 5. Is he a 1,000-yard rusher at the Power 5? He is a power back, utilizes an underrated ability to use that speed, and I think that he's going to go to a program, obviously, that is going to need his services. Florida State, Kentucky, and Louisville, and it makes a lot of sense. For me, Florida State would make sense because they lose Trey Benson. Lawrence Toafili is undergoing surgery. No Rodney Hill. So there's opportunity there down in Tallahassee. Kentucky makes sense because you lose Ray Davis. Now they did get an Ohio State transfer, but Mark Stoops' recruiting grounds is the state of Ohio. Same with Vince Morrow. So this would make sense. And then Louisville, obviously, you're replacing Jawar Jordan. Maybe Isaac Garendo. That's the main thing we're focusing on here. Obviously, if Isaac Garendo decides to come back, you don't need a guy like Peny Boone. But if he doesn't come back, well, then maybe you push all your chips into this basket because of, the opportunity of having a backfield with Don Chaney and Peny Boone. Now, you do risk that if you do take a commitment from Boone, you might lose a guy like a Kewan Brown or a Maurice Turner, which would really be rough for the program. But I understand, you're still trying to maximize a ton of success, and Peny Boone has 1 year remaining, 1,400 yards, 15 touchdowns, 6'1", 240 pounds. I look at a backfield connection with Peny Boone with with Don Chaney Jr. from Miami. And it just makes a lot of sense. I think that he's going to go wherever he's going to go, and he's going to play a ton. So the main thing for me is truthfully just getting to a spot to where, you know what's going to happen with Isaac Guerendo, because we don't yet. And that's where maybe time's not on your side, is that you want Isaac Guerendo to make a decision sooner rather than later, because that'll dictate how you proceed in the portal. And that goes for the running back position, that goes for the defensive line position with Jermaine Lelay, and the cornerback position with Quincy Riley, etc. So personally for me, I don't think Guerendo's going to return, but I could be surprised like I was with Jarvis Brownlee. So TBD is sort of where I'm sitting, but I know that the Louisville coaching staff obviously is very high on Boone's skill set. I think having a guy that's 6'1", 242 pounds is extremely interesting. Of all the opportunities, obviously great around the goal line, but he obviously is very good efficiency-wise because of the 7.2 rushing yards per carry. Granted, I don't think that he replicates that at the Power 5 level, but I think that with the lion's share of carries that he could see a good amount of yards. And I can see a situation where Chaney and Boone could coexist in the backfield and they both get over 500 yards rushing. I do see a situation where that happens in 2024, especially maybe in read option situations with Tyler Shuck, etc. So I think that this is a very interesting opportunity. I think that you hope it's not a situation where he knows he's going to go to Kentucky, but he includes Louisville because it looks better optically and has no interest. But I think that there is interest in all three schools, and obviously vice versa. But he would obviously go play at all three schools and have a solid career year. So, but that's going to wrap up the final segment of the show, the final episode of the 2023 calendar year. I look back on what all happened this year, the first major transfer portal era, having Jeff Brom as the football coach, the rough basketball season, the Elite Eight runs for the women's basketball and volleyball programs, the rough baseball season, etc. I appreciate everyone for tuning into the show all year long. Those that subscribe to the show on YouTube, that showed love on social media, on Twitter, followed the show page, those that I saw out in public that recognized me from the show, that will never get old. I definitely appreciate that. I appreciate all the constructive criticism as well. Those that tell me their thoughts, whether positive or negative, I appreciate it. It helps me get better. It helps me find out, how to best serve you all as the audience in terms of content that you all want. I know that scheduling wasn't always viewer friendly this year in terms of timing. It was very different and unorthodox way of scheduling, and I apologize for that inconsistency, and I appreciate your all's patience. It truly does mean a ton, and I look forward to having more scheduled content for 2024. Hopefully this is a very prosperous year, not only for Louisville Athletics, but for you all, the audience, individually. Be sure to tell me what your favorite moments were from the 2023 calendar year, what episodes you like the most, what you feel like I can do better to help your listening and viewing experience. But that's going to wrap up 2023. Everyone have a great day. Have a great new year. Be safe. We'll see you right back here next year.